and welcome to Founders Friday. This is a tell-all for revenue-obsessed folks. We invite founders, go-to-market leaders, and sales leaders responsible for driving revenue to come and share their experiences with us. On this show, we try to educate and entertain. And there's just a few simple rules. Share your secret sauce, keep your responses punchy, and let's have some fun. My guest today is Rosalyn Elena, currently the Vice President of Global Revenue Operations at Neo4j. She's an advisor for several high-growth startups on all things go-to-market and operations. She's also an active leader on revenue operations in multiple communities and platforms. She's the host of her own podcast called The Revenue Engine. Rosalyn, thanks for joining Founders Friday webcast today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for being a guest on the Revenue Engine podcast. Lots of learnings there as well.
It's a pleasure. So I was introduced to you by our mutual friend, John Stern at Ringpin. And I shared with him what I was working on. And he said, you have to go talk to Rosalyn. She is the queen of RevOps. How did you work your way to that title? How did you become the guru of RevOps? Share that with our audience.
Oh, wow. So I'm not sure I'm the queen of RevOps, but I'm definitely a champion of RevOps. I've had a long journey through many companies. I've led ops teams, various capacities. I think 4 public enterprise companies and 5 high growth SaaS startups. Wow. So I've really seen the good, the bad, and sort of everything in between. I think many folks jump into a part of RevOps, or maybe more likely they sort of fall into it. I'm more of the old school, worked in the trenches kind of breed. I've been in tech for over 25 years. I don't want to date myself, but over 25 years, and specifically leading ops for about 20. So that's pretty much most of my background. Have done everything in go-to-market operations, every single piece of the funnel, if you will. So I think that's how I've kind of earned the title, but I don't know. I think it's a really champion of RevOps more so than queen. I
think you certainly deserve it. You've done so much for this community. I would love to hear a little bit more about the Revenue Engine. Can share with our audience, how did you get started on that, and what's the mission that you're pursuing there?
Yeah. So I, having been a guest on a number of podcasts, was a little cautious about being a host of the podcast, but it's turned out really great. I think, the Revenue Engine is really focused on everything that drives the revenue engine, right? Founder stories, lessons learned, market and business insights, how ops plays that role, and just really looking for tips and advice, really focus on helping what we all want, right? Is to just drive more revenue faster. But my mission around the podcast is also to really share some inspirational leadership stories, right? Around, aside from revenue, but around things like, diversity and inclusion, juggling work-life balance, family. I don't know that there's a balance, but juggling that, building a winning culture, motivating and growing teams, and also helping people really grow professionally and personally. Especially for, minorities, learning from others on how to break barriers, climb that sort of proverbial corporate ladder, and then learning how to, really lean on others to help you get there. So it's a good balance of, revenue discussions and talk about how to drive Revenue Engine, but then also balanced with more of the personal side of, career development, professional development, and sort of real life examples of things.
That's super inspiring. And I know you've spent obviously a lot of time in revenue operations, not just, obviously working in that function, but also expanding the knowledge set around that function. So from where you sit, when you work at a startup in particular and growth startups, what do you see as some of the key pillars of sales and revenue operations? Let's just start there and then work our way through this.
Yeah, I think, revenue operations is really about, people, process, technology, and data, right? If you think about every piece of the journey that you expect your customer to really embark on, whether it's from kind of top of funnel, just interest, to prospecting, to be, going through sort of a sales cycle, becoming a customer, and then ultimately retaining that customer, I think is super important. It's really that infrastructure to support that. So if you think about why RevOps is so broad, right? When you think about the entire journey, and I know that people think about it historically around sort of marketing, sales, customer success. I like to think about it more of top of funnel, middle of the sales cycle, and then sort of post-sales success and services. So you really think about aligning more to the journey and less about to the functions, I guess, if you will.
Yeah. And Rosalyn, from your perspective, you talked about the customer journey and the different parts of that journey. What are the key metrics that you use to prioritize what that looks like, and particularly for startups that are on a growth trajectory? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think depending on your business model, obviously your metrics might be different. Depending on the business model, obviously size of your company, the stage that you're in. But I think there's some core things that any high growth startup is going to measure. Right. And that's, of course, you're looking at your top of funnel, how much is coming into the funnel, how much of that is converting. You're looking at ARR, right? Your run rate, as well as growth. But I think where folks kind of forget to focus enough time on is the back end, right? After a prospect becomes a customer, you really want to look at retention metrics. How were you, driving value for your customers? How are you expanding within your customer base? I think those are super important. So really, conversion, win rates, retention, expansion. And then of course, everyone measures, revenue, right? In terms of ARR, if you're in a SaaS model. But I think a lot of companies forget to focus enough on the customer and the things that, and not just customers that, are your customers, but also the customers that churn, right? Why did they leave? What did they leave? Because they weren't a good use case to begin with, or did we not provide them with the value that they were expecting? Did we not nurture them? All these different reasons. So that can actually feed back into your top of funnel, approach, and back into your strategy. So I think there's some of those key metrics just around all the different parts of the customer journey.
I love that. I think the revenue is the new growth, or retention is the new growth. That's for sure.
Yeah. And also I would just say one more thing is just, if you, not to just focus. I had this conversation with somebody recently about not forgetting to focus on all the different parts of your funnel. So not just the top, like what's actually coming in, and the bottom of, what's actually turning into close one, but looking at your revenue process and looking at all of those early indicators and leading indicators of outcomes, right? Because there's many levers within that process that we can tweak to provide really better outcomes.
That's great. One of my mentors used to say, "Asim, you can never fill a leaky bucket." So I think the retention part is so important.
That's right.
So this is great to hear you kind of reinforce that. Now, let me shift gears a little bit. I think over the years, we've seen sales operations as a function and marketing operations as a function, and so on. And as data has become more important in each function, then there's a new ops function that kind of emerges around it. What kind of changes have you seen in the revenue operations function over the years? How has it evolved?
Yeah. Great question. I think, RevOps has definitely evolved, especially I think with the rise of SaaS, right? That recurring revenue model that we were just talking about with the leaky bucket. There was more complex buying cycles, right? There's more complex selling motions. And I think the drive, sort of the focus on that customer value that we were talking about, customer lifecycle, customer retention. I think all of those factors have contributed to the need for more revenue operations. And you add to that just the explosion of technology, right? Just think we have a piece of tech or technology for every single piece of our business, right? And then the abundance of data, right? So the tech explosion, the need for data, and then that need to move fast, right? Everybody wants to move fast. And so in order to move fast, you need to have the right data. You have to have the right insights, and all at the right time, right? Then you have to have all of the right processes and the infrastructure to support that, which is really where RevOps, or I guess we used to call it go-to-market ops, but really comes in, right? With all of these changes, more and more organizations are realizing really the value of revenue operations and what it is and why they need it. So if I think about sort of the biggest shift or change, I guess I would say that aside from all of those factors contributing to it, but I think the biggest change is probably the perspective now that RevOps is, I think, being viewed as more of a strategic part of the success of the business. And therefore, I think one, you need RevOps, and two, you need to invest earlier, right? And invest more heavily if you really want to scale your business and your revenue business faster.
Got it. Now, you mentioned data as one of the tenets in terms of building a revenue operations function. And obviously, I imagine RevOps teams end up working fairly closely with data analysts and BI teams to get access to the data. How do you see that relationship evolve? And particularly, with the different startups that you've been at and the various startups that you've advised, how do you see that relationship evolve between the data analyst and BI teams as well as revenue operations?
Yeah, I guess in the earlier startups and some of the companies that are, more lean, you typically don't have a BI team, right? Or maybe you don't have sort of a data analyst team or a data reporting team, right? So RevOps becomes that pillar and kind of fills that spot for go-to-market. Right. So we become the folks who not only bring all of the data together in all of your processes, systems, and your tools, but also providing those insights. Right. And I think that's a big part of RevOps and sort of how it's evolved is it's not just about the data, right? Obviously, the data is the foundational aspect, but it's what is the data telling you, right? It's those insights, the story, the ability to make decisions and pivot your business, tweak things all along the journey because of the data, right? And understanding what that data is telling you.
I hear your dog in the background.
I was trying to mute her, but yeah, she's usually drops in because she's super passionate about data as well. I'm not the only one.
She wants to be on our webinar today. So. Okay, great. Okay, so I want to continue this conversation around data, and from your experience, what do you see as companies invest in as they go through various stages of growth as a startup, and particularly as a SaaS startup, in terms of data infrastructure? So, what do they invest in first? What tools? What technologies? What processes or capabilities to build out that data infrastructure to support RevOps?
Yeah, yep. That's a great question. I think a lot of times because there is such great technology out there, companies will quickly go and buy tech, right? Sometimes they buy technology just to buy tech, right? Kind of that shiny new object. And so people will go out and buy it, but they don't have the sort of the strategy or the processes or, how they're even going to use the technology sort of mapped out. So I think if we all kind of take a step back and think about data, right? Having a data strategy is so important because we have plenty of data, right? Everybody is so focused on getting all of the data, but then what do you do with the data, right? I think that's the piece that is the real predicament, I guess, and why we need RevOps or a data team now is to really process that data, understand the data, think about what it's actually telling you and how you're going to not just acquire data, but make the data meaningful. So I actually like to have, really a data strategy, right? You need to understand what are the metrics that matter, and then what are those data elements that are going to give you that visibility into those metrics. And then think about, things as simple as having a data dictionary, right? Because as we talk about even ARR means different things potentially to different people. They may not measure it the same way, right? Pipeline. How often you've been in a call where, marketing comes in, sales comes in, everybody's looking at a pipeline report, but they have different numbers and you wonder why. It's because they don't have the same, that alignment. And so I think that's the other thing that RevOps obviously brings to the table too, is around driving that alignment and visibility. So again, having going back to basics, data definitions or a dictionary, understanding your data strategy, like what are you going to do with the data? How is it going to feed into your strategy, into your metrics that matter? What insights it's going to drive? And then mapping out how does that data flow, right, through your different systems? Because today, data can flow all through the entire, with all of the great technology, it's all integrated, right? But you want to make sure that that data is talking to each other and talking in the same language across all of the systems, so that people can have the right, that single view of business, or single view of the business, right? That we all strive for, everyone looking at the data the same way, at the same, in the same manner, at the same time.
Yeah, I think obviously you have a lot of experience with this. You're spot on with what do you do with the data and how do you tie that back to your strategy and your processes. That's a big focus of ours, is to figure out what do you do with the data and how do you bring all the right data sets together. Now, I want to maybe, given the amount of experience that you've had in this domain, I'm sure you've developed a playbook for how you engage with a new role and new opportunity. Yeah. What are some of the mistakes that you see people make as they set up their revenue operations functions from scratch? A lot of our audience is early stage startups thinking about how to set up their revenue operations function. What mistakes should they avoid?
Yeah, I think one, we mentioned about the technology, right? Buying tech just to buy tech. Yeah. Because people see that shiny object and think, oh, if I have a problem in my go-to-market, I'll just buy this piece of technology and it'll fix it, right? But kind of, as you alluded to, process comes first, right? The process and the policy, and then the data, and then the system, right? Because sort of in that order, you need to understand what your processes are and how the data is going to flow through, what are the right processes to get the right data, and then configure a system to enable that process and enable the data flow, right? And data integration. So I think a lot of mistakes people make, and every time I join a company, it comes back to this definitions, right? People looking at things the same way. I was having a conversation about, something as simple as stages, right? When you think about sales stages, if you go into a new company, how many of your sales reps really all understand every single, what each sales stage means? Right? Yeah. What does each forecast category mean? Right? Some of those things that seem very basic, but if you don't focus on those areas early on and continue to evolve them as your business changes, then your data becomes sort of a nightmare, right? Things start to get mixed up. They don't make sense anymore for your business. And then you have inconsistencies across all of your processes and the data. It becomes that. And I also think that the other thing that I think some companies are probably doing wrong is just not investing early enough. And it doesn't mean that you need a full-blown RevOps function. It doesn't mean that you need a VP of RevOps, but you do need to have somebody, looking at your data, looking at those insights, and starting to build at least a framework for that. So as you start to want to scale, you have a repeatable process that you can use, and then you can tweak, right, as you move forward. But yeah, I think that's that's probably the biggest mistake I've seen.
Very, very helpful, Rosalyn. So let me shift gears a bit. I think you are a minority, you're a woman, you are a RevOps leader and an entrepreneur in tech. It's a rare combination, and I think it'd be great if I'm curious, what are some of the toughest challenges that you've had to overcome in your career?
Yeah. So I started out in tech super early, early mid-90s, when we were still using terminals. Do you remember that? Terminals, desk phones, there was no internet. And then when we did have internet, it was dial-up. Right. It was that dial-up tone. So it was a long time ago. But when I started leading teams in ops, there were very few ops people, right? Ops professionals on the team to begin with, and very few women, especially in sales, right? And marketing. And then very few minority women, right? Women of color. And then on top of that, women who had children, right? People who had kids 20 years ago was very much different from it is now. So you take that combination of all of those attributes where you're the minority, or really a lot of times I'm like the only one, right? So it is a tough place to be. But what's funny about it is that I never looked at it that way, like throughout my career. I never really looked around the room and felt like, oh, I'm the only one here, until recently, when others started talking about, maybe the last 5 years or so, when others started talking about being the only woman in the room, the only mother or parent, the only person of color, and especially the only ops executive, right? If you think about it, we are in the minority. Ratios of sales and marketing and customer success to ops are huge, right? In terms of, 1 to 20, 1 to 30, 1 to 50, even in some smaller companies. And so that's when I really realized like, wow, this is pretty unique and it is different. So with that, I really wanted to be a champion, right, for others who are coming up through the ranks. We talked a little bit about the ops piece. We didn't talk about ops therapy. We should probably touch on that as well. But I think in ops, as women, as mothers, as people of color, really want to be that champion and be a spokesperson for them, but then also show them that, hey, you can have it all, right? You can get to be an executive, be at a VP level or beyond, right? And you can rise up sort of through the ranks and have it all. There's going to be balance and there's give and takes. So I guess if I think about the toughest challenge, I think for me, maybe it's not the toughest challenge for me personally, but what I've seen from others is really kind of being afraid to share your opinion. Or share your perspective, right? It's super natural to be when you're the only person in the room that looks like you, and you don't see a lot of folks that, if you haven't built up sort of that advocacy or champions within the team, then it's super easy to feel like, oh, I have lots of great thoughts, but being afraid to share them. So I guess, for me, my advice would be like, not to be afraid to share your opinion. And I've said this to other people before, whether you have, 2 years experience or you have 20 years experience, you bring value, right? Yeah. There is value add that you can bring to the table. And there's going to be new perspectives that you can share that no one else can. So don't be afraid to, just find your voice and share. You'll be surprised when you start to really share how many people actually will listen.
That's amazing. That's very inspiring. Thank you for taking us through your journey.
Yeah.
So Rosalyn, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you on our webinar. And just to kind of recap a little bit of what we heard, you talked about people, process, operations, and data, and how do you bring all those together to drive a revenue operations function. And of course, your personal journey, your career journey is very inspiring. I'm sure a lot of people would want to reach out to you. You can find Rosalyn's Revenue Engine podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, and on the Sales IQ Global website. I think the best way to reach you would be through LinkedIn. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's the best place, definitely.
Great. Well, again, thank you for joining us. And if you have any thoughts on how data can drive revenue, we'd love to hear from you here at Immersa. You can check us out at immersa.co. Thank you, Rosalyn.